Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. The big news recently was Iran's attack on Israel. We begin today's video by noting how Beijing reacted to the attack diplomatically. On Sunday, the foreign ministry expressed deep concern for the attacks. Then, according to state media, China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, told his Iranian counterpart that, quote, China has noted Iran's statement that its actions taken were limited and was an act of self-defense in response to the attack against the Iranian consulate in Syria, end quote, and that, quote, China appreciates Iran's stress on not targeting regional and neighboring countries, as well as its reiteration on continuously pursuing a good neighborly and friendly policy, end quote. Yesterday, Monday, Yuval Walks, the deputy chief of the Israeli mission in China, expressed displeasure with China's reaction, telling a press conference, quote, we were hoping for stronger condemnation and clear acknowledgement of Israel's right to defend itself, end quote. Ambassador Deepens said at the UN Security Council briefing that, quote, the ongoing situation is the latest spillover of the Gaza conflict. It serves as another reminder that the Palestinian question remains central to the Middle East issue and bears on the peace, stability, and long-term security in the region. If the flames of the Gaza conflict are allowed to continue raging, then the adverse spillover is set to spread still further, making the region even more unstable. End quote. Then, Monday evening, the US House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed legislation aimed at countering China's purchase of Iranian crude oil. The legislation was approved by 338 to 11 vote, veto-proofing the bill. The bill, the Iran-China Energy Securities Act of 2023, expands secondary sanctions against Iran to cover all transactions between Chinese financial institutions and sanctioned Iranian banks used to purchase petroleum and petroleum products. The legislation now moves to the Senate. Next up, we move to the economy, and today, Tuesday, saw the publication of key data. Now, this is official data being published at a very sensitive time, so we need to take it with a heavy grain of salt, but it is important to follow and take note of here. According to the National Bureau of Statistics data, China's GDP grew 5.3% year-on-year in the first quarter, beating expectations. A Caixin survey of economists had an average estimate of 4.9%. To stimulate growth, Beijing turned to a familiar tactic, investing heavily in its manufacturing sector, including a binge of new factories that have helped to propel sales around the world of solar panels, electric cars, and other products, but also exacerbating trade tensions with the US, EU, and others. According to the data also, value-added industrial production was up 4.5% year-on-year in March, down from a 7% increase in the January-February period. Fixed asset investment rose 4.5% year-on-year in the first 3 months, up from 4.2%. Infrastructure investment increased 6.5% year-on-year in the first 3 months, up from 6.3%. Manufacturing investment grew 9.9% year-on-year in the first 3 months, up from 9.4%. Of course, a surge in manufacturing investment will be no surprise to regular viewers. Concerningly, however, retail sales, a proxy for consumption, rose only 3.1% year-on-year in March, down from 5.5%. Harry Murphy-Cruz from Moody's Analytics expressed on this, quote, you cannot manufacture growth forever, so we really need to see households come to the party if China wants to hit the around 5% growth target. Larry Hu, chief China economist at Macquarie, expressed on the data, quote, it's better than expected. At the same time, overall, the retail sales and the property numbers look relatively weak, end quote. He suggested that figures were driven up by exports for new energy industries, adding that any step up in stimulus was unlikely because growth was in line with official targets. Quote, they're probably going to hold off until exports slow down or property gets even worse, end quote. That may not take too long, however. Property development investment dropped 9.5% year-on-year in the first 3 months. Then, in separate numbers, we also learned today that China's home prices continued to fall in March, suggesting the housing crisis is getting worse. Price declines deepened from a year earlier in both new and used homes. New home prices in 70 cities, excluding state-subsidized housing, fell 2.7% in March from a year earlier, steeper than February's 1.9% drop. They slid 0.34% from February, when they retreated 0.36%. Existing home prices dropped 5.9% year-on-year, worsening from 5.2% in January, and falling in all 70 cities. They declined 0.53% month-on-month, improving from a 0.62% decrease in February. Beijing has grown increasingly alarmed about the property crisis and the sluggish economy. Last week, U.S. outlet Bloomberg reported that a number of state banks are making their strongest effort yet to encourage credit officials to approve loans for developers. Then this week, Goldman Sachs analysts wrote in a note that private developers face a 4 trillion yuan funding gap to complete pre-sold homes. $550 billion US. And finally for today, the London-based Environmental Justice Foundation has published a report on PRC distant water fishing in the southwest Indian Ocean. Chinese distant water fishing has become a topic of concern and controversy in recent years. Before we dive into the report, if you're enjoying today's episode or getting some value from it, liking and subscribing is a huge help. It is the only way in which the channel can grow. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help me keep the channel financially sustainable. I rely on your support to keep the channel afloat, so this is a big help too. Thank you so much. Now, this report argues that China's distant water fleet is by far the world's largest, both in terms of the number of fishing vessels it has and the volume of fish caught, operating across the world's major fishing grounds. Increasingly, this fleet has been associated with a range of illegal, unsustainable and abusive behaviors towards marine ecosystems and crew alike. These behaviors, when considered alongside the sheer size of its fleet, quote, pose a serious threat to the sustainability of global fisheries and the well-being of fishers and the millions of people who rely on the ocean for their livelihoods, while undermining good governance and the rule of national laws and international regulation in fisheries, end quote. The findings of the report show that, quote, while couched in terms of win-win sustainable development and collective benefits from the blue economy, the realities on board many vessels in China's distant water fishing are in direct contradiction of these stated aims. Illegal fishing and human rights abuses were found to be commonplace on Chinese vessels in the southwestern Indian Ocean, including routine shark finning, the deliberate capture and injury of vulnerable marine megafauna, the crews suffering from physical violence, abusive working and living conditions, intimidation, and threats, end quote. UK-based The Economist, reporting on this, writes that the Chinese government insists it has a zero-tolerance attitude towards illegal fishing. Quote, yet it appears to be using its geopolitical heft to facilitate the depredations of its fleet. Chinese vessels reportedly receive some $7 billion a year in government subsidies. In the southwest Indian Ocean, they sometimes travel under the escort from the Chinese Navy. End quote. The report is called Tide of Injustice, Exploitation and Illegal Fishing on Chinese Vessels in the Southwest Indian Ocean, and is a good read for anybody interested in this space. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.